Hello and welcome to another rousing edition of Trending Topics with BB. I am your humble host, Brooke Brown, now hence the BB. Well, it is 2019. Happy New Year. This is the first and foremost episode of 2019, but as you will see, there's plenty of new and exciting housekeeping to get out of the way, as I like to call it, for the new year. So, with that being said, please head to our official website at trendingtopicswithbbpodcast.com. There you will find every link to social media and platform where this podcast is found. If you haven't already found this via Google by turning Topics with BB as your keyword. But if you want the official website, Trending Topics with BB Podcast is and should be your bookmark thus far. And if you are a new listener, you may need to go to that website anyway to listen to past episodes to get your fix of all of the topics that have been discussed. This podcast is going on 4 years of labor and love. It has been stretched into 4 years due to my need to keep a day job. But I love getting the chance to sit down and talk to people of all walks of life, all backgrounds, and all topics, hence the name of this podcast. It is about the trending topics that are important to those that are guests on this podcast. And that being said, if you are a returning listener and loyal listener, I thank you. But you will have figured out in the past that there's been issues with sound quality on this podcast due to technology and long distance and just really my trial and error of how to produce a podcast. And that leads me to this. So my goal is to one day have the right equipment and build my own podcasting studio, whether it's in my home or at another piece of real estate that is to be determined. But along those lines, this podcast has actually cost me more money than I have made in the past, even with my previous sponsors. But that's really not why I podcast. I podcast just because I find interviews and conversations and learning from different people a valuable thing. So I have started my own crowdfunding sort of campaign just to test the waters, so to speak. And I have launched it for the first part of this year, just for 60 days on Indiegogo, as a chance to create a community and to get more people involved with their passion through this podcast. So if you head over to Indiegogo.com, and I'm probably saying that wrong, it's probably Indiegogo, whatever, .com, and look for Trending Topics with BB podcasts under campaigns, I believe the category is blogs and podcasts. But nonetheless, if you become a backer, there is 3 tiers of perks you get for however you would like to contribute to the cause. And that gets you stuff like a shout out here on this podcast, a chance to be a guest on this podcast, as well as just be able to be and plug whatever you would like to plug on this podcast as a future advertisement. So for all those listeners finding this podcast, and if you're spreading the word, please head over to Indiegogo.com and look up my campaign. That'll also be in the description. The link will be in the description of this episode. But nonetheless, I would appreciate your support. Now, along those lines, I was able to find a new and exciting app called Ringer, R-I-N-G-R, no E, that allows me to create better sounding podcast interviews for those that may be long distance. I used to use Google Voice, as previous episodes will show you, not necessarily the best audio levels. But along those lines, I found this new app, and this episode that I am about to introduce was used that app for the first time. Now, I didn't know exactly how the audio was going to turn out, and I will warn you, please forgive me for my end of the conversation being a little distorted at times. I guess I spoke too much into the mic, and thus it was a little overwhelming for the audio to correct itself through this app. But it is a great app and has will continue to be fine-tuned for upcoming episodes and my wonderful guests. Now that long-winded housekeeping is out of the way, I want to introduce my guest. As you will have known, I'm really into the trance music scene. Love trance music. It has saved my life in about 3 or 4 years ago, but that's a whole nother episode. But along those lines, I love talking to people that love trance music as well, and love music, really. I'm a music-aholic, or buff, or whatever you want to call me. But I found, through mutual friends, through mutual love, Limelight, which is a great and upcoming... Well, they're not upcoming, they're really breaking, but one of the members of Limelight, I will speak to the second member, his name is Nicholas Gunn. He has been in the music business for quite some time, as he will explain in this episode. And it is a very interesting journey. And he also talks about not only creating trance music, but his ambient music and rock music in the 90s. So without further ado, and ruining the story of Nicholas Gunn, I give you my wonderful chat with Nicholas Gunn. This episode of Trending Topics with BB is brought to you by Podbean. Did you know that 2018 was the year of the podcast? Hell, I may have made that statistic up. But due to the popularity of the podcasting medium, it is a great way to help your brand or business grow. This podcast is going on 4 years of labor and love and trial and error. That's why I chose to host my podcast on Podbean. Podbean is one of the medium's best options for hosting your podcasts that has been and will constantly evolve over time. My listeners can get 1 free month now of hosting by heading to www.podbean.com/ttwithbb. Again, that is www.podbean.com/ttwithbb. This episode of Trending Topics with BB is brought to you by Teeth Powder 2.0. Have you been looking for a toothpaste alternative that does not contain fluoride? Do you have sensitive teeth, bad gums, and overall bad oral hygiene? Then Teeth Powder 2.0 is the product for you. Now, Teeth Powder 2.0 was developed out of the necessity to strengthen enamel, get rid of plaque, clean gums, and keep your oral health in tip-top shape. This product is exclusive to my listeners, and you can get your own 70-gram order for just $12 by heading to teethpowder.com, then clicking on the Products tab. Again, that is Teeth Powder, TEEFPOWDER.com, then clicking on that Products tab to get your order. Now have a healthy and prosperous life with Teeth Powder 2.0. This episode of Trending Topics with BB is brought to you by Ringer. Are you thinking about starting your own podcast but need a way to interview guests long distance? Or do you have a need for a conference calling app but without the risk of software issues? Then Ringer is the app for you. After some careful research of all the apps out there on the market, Ringer became the clear favorite. Ringer can be used on your PC or Mac or smartphone through a convenient app. They have 2 inexpensive plans for you to choose from based on your needs and features to create studio quality audio. My listeners can save up to 25% on a plan using ringer.com/ttwithbb. So what are you waiting for? Have the broadcast of your life with Ringer. And that's again, for all my listeners, spelled RINGR.com/ttwithbb.
Awesome. So I'm glad this was able to work, and I'm excited. And first and foremost, how was your holiday season?
It was really good. Yeah, nice. I went back to California, back to pretty much where I grew up mostly, and went back to see some friends, some family, did a little bit of business, not too much, and it was really nice. How about yours?
Yeah, it was pretty low key. Had a nice family dinner on Christmas. Um, really didn't do too much for the New Year's because it gets kind of crazy around here. So,
Yeah, is that
uh,
Arizona?
yeah, in Phoenix.
Cool. Very nice. I know quite a bit about Phoenix actually.
Awesome. So, to kind of start, I usually like to start kind of with your background. I know a little bit about you and I've read up a little bit, but I kind of would prefer to get it from you other than maybe what might be on the internet.
Okay,
Um,
sure. You don't believe everything that's on the internet?
I don't, but
Well,
some
good.
may.
That's good. That's good. That's good.
So, obviously, kind of we've met through a mutual friend, Tanner, and
Yeah.
we all kind of have our origin stories, but you kind of want to start with kind of like where you fell in love with music and started getting
Yeah.
into.
Any like a particular genre or just in general?
No, no, just kind of like where your love of music kind of started, where it stemmed from. Did
Oh gosh,
you
well,
come from a
I was
musical
six.
background?
Yeah, so like I was six. My grandfather was a very, very well-known classically guitar trained guitar player, and I was living in Britain at the time. I was born and raised in the UK. And at 6 years old, my parents came to me and they said, "Hey, do you want to play an instrument?" And I said, "Sure, I want to play the flute." And it's only because I'd seen the night before James Galway, who's a famous flautist, play on TV. And so I was hell bent on learning the flute. But it was a good choice because it just so happened I did it well. And I was actually enrolled in the Royal Academy of Music in England. And I studied there very intensely classical music between the age of 6 and 12 before I moved to America. And so that was kind of like my formal training. And I did it so young. It's almost like learning to walk. It became a part of me. I mean, I studied with the greats. I studied Beethoven and Handel and Rachmaninoff and Paganini, the great classical composers and Debussy, the stuff that really molds melodic content. And so by the time I moved to America, I had this crazy formal training, which kind of blossomed into a more progressive training, which was more rock and roll, more pop. Not really dance back then, unless you want to call it
Right.
disco. But then I kind of gravitated towards playing drums and kit and percussion, and I started rock and roll bands. And believe it or not, I played drums between the ages of 16 and 21. I literally played every club on Sunset Boulevard. Madame Wong's, Gazzari's, the Troubadour, the Whiskey. I did them all. And it was just an insane experience, right? Because not only do you get to learn music culture, you get to learn what you like and what you don't like and what you want to be involved in. And obviously the whole rock and roll thing wasn't just, it wasn't my speed. I was so young. I felt like I kind of wanted to get back into my classical training a bit more and back into my classical roots because it just had a lot more meaning to me. So how long do you have? Because this is a long story. You can stop me anytime.
No, I'm riveted. I have a few follow-up questions, but continue.
Yeah, so let's put it this way. As a broad stroke, I've had an insanely dense musical career for my age. And so when I moved to America and I'm playing kit in all these rock and roll bands and playing all the clubs on Sunset Boulevard, then I realized I really kind of want to get back into my classical roots. And I kind of observed what was really selling in instrumental music back then. And it was kind of this world, kind of new agey, kind of tribal, kind of earthy nature sound. And there were retail chains that were supporting this type of music. And one was called Natural Wonders and another one was called Nature Company. And they had thousands of stores at all the high end malls. So I started actually recording music just on any gear I could find, these ideas. And believe it or not, I was pretty damn good at it. And it turned into something where one person said, hey, that's a great idea. You need to meet this person. This person buys music for that chain. And the next thing I know, I'm getting a record deal. And I'm getting a record deal from one of the largest labels that are specializing in that particular genre, which then turned into a 7-album deal. I did 7 records. I did 5 records with them, sold 2 million units, 2 million records in these retail chains called Natural Wonders and Nature Company. And back in the day, Barnes & Noble, Borders Books and Music, Tower Records, Best Buy, during the CD days. And, as I'm kind of like going and morphing through this stage of doing instrumental music, and I had these exclusive commitments that kind of prohibited me from doing any kind of other genre at the time, I had this massive love of this new sound that was coming out called trance. And it was almost like the breakdown of what I was doing already in instrumental, but except you had the drops, you had the backbeat, you had the 4 on the floor, you had all the stuff that made up, what people know trance to be. And, I was listening to the early trance days, such as in like 1997, where Sonique's I Feel So Good, and early Paul Oakenfold, and all that kind of stuff that written, and also early Armin van Buuren, all the stuff that kind of molded the early days of trance. And so finally, when I kind of got to this point where I wanted to start experimenting with trance, I did it on the side, but I was still doing instrumental music. And then I started a record label. And I started a record label focusing on my genre of instrumental music. And it turned into this massive thing where I ended up representing 75 artists and a few thousand titles. And I became the front-running record label for the genre. And it was distributed exclusively by Warner. So I had this great deal with Warner. I had this great record label going. I'm kind of producing trance on the side, the early stages of it, but I'm really still ingrained in producing my instrumental stuff. But it was at that time I realized, wow, I didn't want to run a record label anymore because it was just taking up all my time. I was pushing pencils. I wasn't producing music. So basically, when the decline happened of record retail, about 2008, 2009, and literally the bottom fell out of the market, not just with the banks worldwide, but with record labels, with retail stores, my label collapsed. And it was a great time for me to kind of regroup and say, well, shit, I've got this huge catalog now of like 250 instrumental tracks that are still doing well in the market. And everything's now moving over to streaming full time. Everything's coming out of CD and going towards digital only. I kind of regrouped and I literally took my existing catalog, put it back out there through a deal I have with Sony The Orchard, and then started producing trance full time. And that kind of brings me today to where I'm at. And over the last maybe 5 to 6 years, I've been kind of honing that, which led me to my deal with Armada and also my partnership with Tanner originally. So there you go, in a nutshell.
Awesome. So I have about 10 follow-up questions. No. Okay.
You could have interrupted me anytime, by the way. So.
No, well, first I want to go back to the beginning. Because I come from a musical background, my father was in Latin percussion, and then I technically can still. I actually, for the first time in about 6 years, pulled out my Barry saxophone the other day, but I play alto and Barry for 17 years. And the reason I bring it up is you talked about your musical training, and I've been having these not arguments, but discussions with other people who may not come from a musical background, but do you think knowing music theory and kind of the background and kind of how to like write music from that side different than maybe some other artists of today that may not have that musical background?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think that there is natural talent. But in order to write complex, dense, layered music, true like polyrhythmic and polyphonic music, you have to have a real true understanding of what it all means. If I come to somebody and say, hey, let's write a piece in F minor, I need those people to know what F minor is. If it's an F sharp minor, I need to know. People need to know what F sharp minor is because music can be extremely complex. It just depends on how far you want to take it and how much knowledge you have of how to mold sound, mold textures, mold frequency. You got to remember, all these notes are just frequencies. So the better understanding you have of music theory, the better off you are, period. And anytime somebody says, oh, you don't need to, it's usually them making up for something they don't have.
That's my opinion, but I'm glad others, because I've had this discussion recently with some people that are like, well, what about those people that hear melodies and stuff by ear? And from my experience, I'm not saying that you can't have that kind of creativity in music, but I feel like with so much music and so much sounds and access nowadays, I feel like our brains, if you're coming from that, trick you into thinking that it is something new when it's probably a melody you heard on a commercial or the song you listen to.
Well, can I give you a great example? So here's a great
Sure.
example of that. So a melody is a melody. It's not really based in theory. It's a lead line without progression or chord progression. It basically is single notes that make up a melodic structure. Now there's choices you can make for progressions that can be underneath that melody. Now there is even scientific and psychological study of why people walk away from music they've heard and remember the melody when they walk away from the song and whistle it or sing it. And it's not because of just the melody. It's because of how the melody fits on the progression. So if you, let's say, for example, you write a piece of music in, well, let's say F sharp minor again. There's certain chord and progressions that work within that key structure that complement the melody, make it much more interesting, make it much more memorable. So if that person was to hear that melody all by itself, the chances of them walking away from that particular experience, remembering that melody and whistling it, are far less than if they heard it against a really well thought out, complex progression structure. Period. And you have to know music in order to understand that kind of thinking.
Right. So my next question is, do you suggest, coming from the background you do, and maybe I might not have as much as you, but to understand kind of, because it's hard. I guess that's why I said I had discussions, arguments with people, because for those that didn't come from a musical background and kind of understanding a little bit more in theory as well as in history, I feel like they just assume you just use the computer or you just pull out an instrument and play, and it's not quite that simple.
No, I think some people have wonderful ears, right? And then they can discern whether tones are working together properly. Whether or not they can tell you, what kind of notes make up a certain progression and so forth. I think I don't like to delve too much into theory when I'm writing music, because it separates you from truly getting in touch with your heart and truly getting in touch with the experience that you're trying to find deep within yourself. But there is a point during the production process you fall back on the theory to really tighten it up. And so
that makes sense.
Well, yeah, it does, because that's what executes an extremely well thought out production. And I can tell you this over and over again: choice of bass notes, choice of overall, tones that you're using. A pad, you may not want to use a typical triad in a pad because you want to separate the notes out so it sounds better in the mix. There's all these things you have to do and have to understand to do in order to get stuff really kicking ass. Otherwise, you just, so basically what I'm saying is you always fall back. The great producers, the great musicians will always fall back on theory to figure out things and really make it finite.
Okay. That makes more sense. It's funny. It's kind of hard when you come from that background and then you're trying to explain it to somebody, but they're like looking at you, they're like, what's a scale? And I'm like, okay, never mind.
Well, I totally get that, and I do. But what's the argument there? Are they arguing that you don't need that, or are you sitting here? So, what's their music like?
Well, it's just, a friend just coming up with a few things they think they hear maybe in their dreams or when they're bored.
Hey, proof is in the pudding. Proof is in the pudding. I always say if somebody says they're really good, then play me your stuff. And if their stuff isn't well executed and it's not dense enough or it's not beautiful enough and it's not making you cry and it's not well executed and well put together, then, and that, but because of their lack of theory is a result potentially of why it's not well put together, then it's a good argument for maybe they should go learn some theory.
Makes sense. All right, so my
I mean,
next
I always,
question.
yeah,
No,
go ahead.
no, go for it.
No, it's just this is a very common question, and you have to observe excellence to observe excellence to understand excellence. And I can't get over the amount of lack of wanting to learn in young producers today. Just because they have a computer at their fingertips. Hang up your computer, dude. Go learn some piano theory. Go learn some chordal theory. Go learn the basics of music. It's not that hard. You can do it online. You can do it on YouTube. Then come back and produce kick-ass music.
Right, and why? Because of, do you think, of the lack of attention span and the way everything's online in terms of music, do you think that's why there's so many people just being like, oh, I can just pull out, use software and that'll create what I want to hear?
I think the world has created a massive attention deficit disorder in all of us. Adults, young people, everyone. And the problem is there's just not enough time being spent in learning the basic approach to excellence. Mediocrity is pervasive, and mediocrity takes us over when we do not observe excellence. And the problem is we don't have enough excellent people out there saying, you need to be excellent, you need to follow this, you need to do this. I mean, the great producers we all love, the great dance producers, the trance producers, we know who they are, especially the ones who have great ears. You look at what they've learned and where they come from, 9 times out of 10, they've had to really sit down and learn.
Right. So, to kind of also go back in your journey, what first struck you, other than the TV performance that you saw, about the flute? Because I know I grew up with the saxophone, and some people are like, that only pertains to jazz, but I'm like, not necessarily if you play it correctly, but I mean,
it's the same fingering as a flute.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
So then you have that argument with people that don't know music. Oh, that's a woodwind. But anyway,
yeah.
So what struck you to flute? Because most people would be like, really, the flute? Unless it's like some
insanity.
Yeah. No, I think it's cool though.
I always say it was. Yeah. Well, yeah. If you're Ron Burgundy, maybe, but
no. But even before that, though.
I guess
because.
The thing.
Well, the reason I ask is because maybe it's because I grew up in I don't know if it was like this for you where you grew up, but I grew up doing the whole band thing and the band kicked. So I was around.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like all instruments. So I guess maybe that was the thing.
Yeah, I was in band for 4 years too. I mean, I did the whole thing all the way through high school.
Right, and I did marching band even in college. So, like.
Oh wow, good for you. Well, yeah.
Yeah, just for a couple years. But, but that was the thing, is like a lot of people, there's a lot of preconceived notions even within the community of who should play what instrument. So that's why I was curious, because I guess what I'm saying is most men don't admit that they played the flute. They always like upgrade to like the trumpet or something.
And I didn't until I actually made a career of it. It's true. I mean, it's not something I don't really play much anymore, because I'll be honest with you, and I'll say this in this conversation. Yeah, it served me well for a period of time when that kind of music was selling. And trust me, I cringed on the fact that, God, why didn't I learn guitar? Why wasn't I a really proficient piano player? Because I would have preferred to have been. But for some reason, I just happened to have gotten stuck on that instrument at a very young age. I applied it during a time where that kind of music was selling, and I was doing really cool stuff with it too. My stuff was mixed with Latin guitar and hand percussion and bamboo flutes that were overblown and really cool sounding, almost like indigenous kind of stuff. And so it wasn't more traditional concert stuff as you would think a flute would be used in. So I used it in different ways, and I made it as cool as I could. And the whole time I'm thinking, oh my God, can I just play another instrument really well? So it's not like I sat there the whole time going, God, I'm so happy I chose the flute. I just made it work.
So is that also a reason why you kind of transition into drums and percussion?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt. I had to be cool. But the funny thing was, it was exactly what I needed because you have flute, which represents, melody, and is in the counterpoint theory that goes with all of that. And then you have drums, which is purely rhythmic and all backbeat. And the two coming together was really a great marriage. Because I was able to use my knowledge of theory and percussion and drums, along with my knowledge of melody and so forth. And fortunately, I did have a classical training, so I knew a lot about piano. I knew how to approach production and so forth. So when you put all that together, it was kind of like a winning combination.
So to continue with that, then when you transition after to drums and you kind of put all of your background together, when you were um, transitioning kind of in the rock scene, how was that? Because you mentioned you
Yeah,
played in a lot of great venues that are still iconic today. So
yeah, yeah. So what was it like playing in the venues? Sorry,
yeah,
one
well,
more
what
time
was
on the question.
that period of time like?
It was crazy. It was. I was way too young for it because it was really kind of a 21 and over venue, and I was like between 16 and 21, and I couldn't even drink when I went there. It's like kind of weird. Here I am playing the whiskey, and I can't even drink because I'm too young, or we wouldn't even tell them that I was under 21. But it was kind of weird, but it was fun because I got a lot of knowledge on the culture, and it was a culture that I saw destroying people, and it was very competitive. It was very kind of not what I wanted, and it wasn't musical enough. In all honesty, it just wasn't a musical enough.
So, well, that kind of brings up. So my father kind of had not a similar, well, kind of, but he played music at a young age. He was in some bands growing up, and he was in bars and stuff, and saw a lot of stuff on when he was way younger than like, I think he wasn't even like 16. And
Yeah, well,
it kind of like put a bad taste in his mouth about certain behavior of people, but I can understand. Is that kind of what you're alluding to? Is that you just kind of see people um, focus on things that, you know, really take the fun out of it?
yeah, it was just. I think what it was is it's coming from the background I had with music. I wasn't getting a lot of satisfaction out of it musically. It was fun. It was a lot of fun. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we were playing a lot of covers because no one really wants to hear your originals until you blow up. Otherwise you just, oh God, what's that song they're playing? And so you play a lot of covers, and you're in this culture where it's highly competitive between the bands, and it's also just kind of a really dirty, grungy scene. And I didn't kind of have that feeling and look about me or want about me. I mean, let's put it this way. The rockers back in the day, the glam rockers and all those guys back in when I was that age, that's not a scene that I ever thought I would ever be in, period. And I kind of just found myself in it because I was playing drums. And so it just didn't appeal to me for all those reasons.
That makes sense. So, was there a lot of people that maybe you saw during that time that really didn't stick with it because of that?
Oh, no, yeah, I mean, it's 1 in 100 that make it. So everyone becomes an accountant. Every promoter, musician, if I gave you a nickel for as many times as I've had a friend or a colleague, and I hate to say this to everyone out there, but the music business is the staying game. And I always try to tell people, young producers, sustainability is your key to success. So don't be too stupid. And the thing is if I had a nickel for every young musician that became something else other than a musician because they just didn't navigate the path correctly, I'd be wealthy. As the cliche saying goes. It's just such a hard road to hoe. You've got to be really smart. You got to learn how to monetize the music industry. You've got to be uber talented, and you've got to be able to put all the jigsaw pieces together.
All right, so to kind of swing back around on that, then as from that time period you mentioned, like, that was the time of CDs still, and now we're in such everything's streaming and online, world of the music business, and obviously the economy and just the things have changed. How have you been able to sustain? Because most people nowadays, you see a lot of artists that are just getting burnt out because they make most of their money touring all over.
Well, I sold a couple million units in the mid-90s, and I have over 300 published tracks, and I own almost 100% of all that publishing. I'm not only the writer, the producer, the engineer, and the composer of all those 300 works, I maintain all those rights. I've maintained those rights. I've corrected all the revenue streams that are payable to me on those rights, and I've made sure that they're all well lubricated across the decades to make sure that all my revenue streams are going to the right area, because that's a lot of work to have out there. And it does pay. There's licensing, there's movies, there's sync, there's all kinds of stuff that tap into that kind of catalog. If you know what you're doing, you do not have to be uber famous to make a living in the music biz.
So, well, that makes complete sense. So the artists that you hear that like have disputes with their catalog or any other thing concerning that, is it because they relinquished a lot of their control, like the rights you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I laugh at the dance industry because these kids are so willing to just completely give up their masters in publishing right away, just for a shot at success. And I am too, to break into the trance industry. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think there's great deals out there to be had. And it seems to me that the pub splits are quite fair, but you're literally giving away your masters. The master's not really worth much today, not like it used to be when CDs were being pressed, but it's all about publishing and touring today. So I think there's a lot of bad deals being done for the idea that fame is more important, so I'll sign anything. I think if you can get a fair deal on pub, if you're at least getting a fair share, which is probably 50 or better, the mass is not even really a point of negotiation because it's not worth much today. But I think if you have great representation and then you have a good idea about where your touring future is going to be, and like I said, maintaining your publishing rights and also learning how to set up your revenue streams, such as registering with the societies, Sound Exchange, ASCAP, CSAC, BMI, depending on which one you want to be there, and also making sure that those revenue streams are being provided to you accurately, then there is a living to be made. But then again, the whole industry has changed so that streaming is still not paying enough. You would have to have dozens and dozens and dozens and maybe even hundreds of titles performing well before you even saw a good living. It's a sad state of affairs today. It really is.
So along those lines, then, because there was an article recently, actually over the holidays, that kind of go along with that was trying to explain. I don't know if it was Rolling Stone or New York Times, one of them that I actually trust. They mentioned that the top stream song of the holidays was Mariah Carey's "All I Want for Christmas."
Yeah.
Then they actually released how much she actually made from it, and people were shocked. And I go, this is what needs to be publicized all the time, because then people will understand why artists that may be famous are still struggling.
Well, look, we have to understand what the problem is. And the problem has always been right there at our fingertips. It's just not understood or talked about. This kind of loops back towards education within the music industry, knowledge, theory, all that stuff. If a kid doesn't want to learn theory, then he may not be a great producer. He may not be a great composer. If a kid wants to be in the music business, then he needs to learn why is he not getting money on streaming? Why does the copyright law fail him? Well, I can tell you why the copyright law has failed everyone. The streaming companies came in and start a business based upon 1976 copyright law. It hasn't been modified until just last year with the Modernization Music Act. Things are now changing, and they will change pretty swiftly as we move through 2019. But the most frustrating thing is, Brooke, I sit here telling you this right now, most of the music industry under the age of 30 have no fucking idea even what I'm talking about. But yet they all complain why they're not making a living. They can't tell you why, because they don't educate themselves. There is a big problem in the music industry with thinking that your talent alone and your genius behind the keyboard or in front of the guitar is going to earn you a living. You have to be so good at everything. You have to be excellent at your craft. You have to be uber talented, but you also need to understand what the hell's going on in the business. You just have to know.
Right. So I've had the privilege recently to talk to some other people that are in trance. Ram mentioned something over because I went to Dream State, and he mentioned some frustrations, and I've heard this from a lot of people actually in the trance world. I don't know how it is throughout all of dance music, but how they feel that people are putting too much emphasis on like popularity on social media, but on the same token of things, it's still important because like you have to have the following. So kind of my question, I guess, is if people aren't educating themselves, is it because people are assuming that, well, my talent alone should speak for itself as opposed to maybe everything else?
So social media is smoke and mirrors. There's a tipping factor with social media when you have a brand page where you have people, most of your fans, you don't even know who they are, and they're engaging with you in the hundreds and the multiple shares and multiple ridiculous commentary. That's when social media really takes on a beast of its own that's useful. But until then, your social media is the circle of your friends and maybe one circle out from them talking and loving about you. But quite honestly, it's a painful realization when that artist goes outside of that circle and puts their name in a Google search and they don't even have a knowledge graph show up on the right-hand side. That is a test of how many people are truly searching you in the marketplace. Last.fm is a great way to go see how many people and how much public propagation of your content is being generated to show up on Last.fm. These are all very painful realizations for people who hide behind their social media smokescreen. Social media doesn't mean shit unless you get past the tipping factor. And we know what that is. When a brand page has thousands and thousands and thousands of followers and they're integrating with that person on multiple levels. Until that point, and by the way, brand pages on Facebook, for example, let's just talk Facebook, which is not obviously IG, it's not Twitter, but Facebook only has a 16% reach on brand pages. So it's sad. You have to have mass density there. And it's the same with Instagram, and it's the same with Twitter. They're just different kinds of platforms, but they all matter. The social media tool is aggravating to me because there are a lot of artists that are getting confused. You know, the fact is that your immediate ring of friends and the ring just outside of that ring, they'll always love you and talk about you, but it's not the real navigator of your search or the people that are truly searching you in the world. That's the good old Google. Put the name in. What comes up?
Right. So how do I guess the question is, you mentioned people like who are young they don't understand why things aren't, I guess, breaking. But do you also think that because of the idea of fame and maybe fortune and all of that has outweighed hard work?
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. I mean, Brooke, that's a very, very smart comment. And it's the defining factor for what's happened. People want instant gratification today. They just want fame. They want to wake up and have a freaking Instagram following and be famous. The bottom line is you've got to do the work. And we're sitting here talking about young producers, and we're sitting here talking about them not having knowledge. But mind you, I'm talking about the average. I'm talking about the average person that doesn't understand. I also know and have in my circle plenty of young producers that are so well educated on what they need to do. They are so on the ball. They know what's going on completely. So I'm not talking about people who are highly educated or really have an intense knowledge of how it's all going on. There's a lot of young people that do, but those people are going to be successful. They will be successful. That is the difference.
So I guess going forward, then, um, well, we could talk about what is it really a genre thing, or is it? Do you just think it's just the industry as a whole?
No,
Because
it's the industry as a whole. Dance is just it's percolated. It's been percolating for 10 years. Dance is just a genre that is focused very much so on a 13 to 30 demo. I mean, and it's the new rock and roll, right? And trust me, if you went back 15 to 20 years ago, we'd be having the same conversation a little bit differently about a whole different genre. It's just that I don't think anything changes. I think knowledge is power. I think the only thing that's different today than has been different from the past is that we are an instant gratification society, and we're seeing a lot of young people rise up in this society that are just not willing to take the time to really become great at what they do.
and going forward, how do we fix this?
Well, here's the thing. So there's not a lot of people who are older producers like me that are allowing themselves to be heard. I've tried to set up forums where there's education in music and education in business. Unfortunately, it takes a lot of time to do that, and I find myself more busy in the studio today than I ever was in my career, which is kind of a downer because I have so much knowledge to give about the amount of time and energy and focus you need to put into a music career. But at the same time, setting up a workshop or a forum like that takes time, and it takes a certain focus of its own. But that's the key. We need mentors. We need older people that are teaching young people the way it should be done. But you can find that in certain schools, and you can find that in certain private education. But the music business is weird in that the really good mentors are so fucking busy they have no time to sit down and talk to the young people, and that's the sad truth.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, I guess because I I've had, I guess I just love music and I'm passionate, but I also love the history and the
Yeah.
intricacies of music. I guess that's just me, my curiosity. Um, I'm not your average person of just like sitting back and letting it happen. I kind of like to research and learn more.
Yeah, it's great.
Um,
It's great. It's fantastic. Yeah, I mean,
and
we're talking about a certain demo, right? We're talking about, I think we started talking originally about the musician or the producer that basically says, well, I don't have a lot of theory background and I have these ideas, but I feel I can execute them as well as anyone. And then they find that they can't, or they think they are, and they're really not. And
right,
it's because like there is that whole idea of subjectiveness. There is subjectivity in music, but there's good and there's bad. It's true. I mean, I'm a real, and you could ask Tanner because Tanner's worked with me in the studio over the last, what is it, year and a half now. I'm very honest. If somebody comes into the studio with me and their stuff is just kind of like, you just got to tell them, man, you need to really put a lot more time in here, here, and here, and here, and here. And half of the time they don't want to hear it because their perception of their own material is far greater than what it truly is. It's a difficult place to be.
awesome. So to kind of swing it back around to trans, I kind of remembered like my fifth question. Um, so
Sorry, yeah, a lot of
when you
talking.
brought it back around to trans, because next week you mentioned Paul Oakenfold. Well, he's going to be in Phoenix next week, so we're excited about that.
Nice.
But
Nice.
So you mentioned like your early like discovering of Paul Controlled Records and Armin
Yeah.
Records and all these great artists that are still out today.
Yeah.
What about trance that got you hooked, other than your classical training and kind of most would say trance is kind of like the
Yeah.
classical music of dance, but what kind of drew you to trance back then and have kept
Oh my
you
God.
going?
Well, it was the club experience. Obviously, the club experience is key and central to understanding that culture. And you have to be, and you know what I'm saying here. The formula of trance is a beautiful, magical thing, and I think all musical genres have a certain formula. Country has a formula. You have certain players that make up country. Hip hop, certain elements that make up hip hop, so on and so on. The trance, you have certain sounds and certain textures and certain beats that go into creating it that have always been just absolutely magic. It's almost like you died and went to heaven. It's so blissful at times. And the way the breakdown occurs in today's trance and the drops, the contrast in the music, and then you tie that into the club experience and you listen and have that experience in the right setting with the right systems, the formula is just astounding. It's just astounding. And I can't tell you that I can listen to trance all day long. If somebody said, okay, you have to listen to some kind of club music all day long, I may choose house, but the ultimate climax moment of the club experience, of the ultimate blissful state experience to me is trance. It just has a formula, a winning formula that's just so brilliant, so deep and textural and gorgeous and just so beautiful.
So, do you agree that it's sometimes hard to listen to what they call EDM? I mean, don't get me wrong, I love techno and I love house, and
Isn't that so? EDM used to be a much broader statement. It's apparently now a much more focused statement. So,
well, I guess it depends on. For me, the definition is kind of music that you would more than likely, like, I guess because I'm not really into like drum and bass or trap or those
mm-hmm.
type of genres. That's kind of what my definition is. Just kind of
Yeah.
the genres that get everybody to like a main stage at a festival.
Yeah, it's more the popular tracks that are getting the radio play, or maybe I don't see. It's interesting because I'm terrible at this. I really only focus on what I'm doing, and that's why I've always kind of needed a good A&R guy up my side, and that's why Tanner and I have we still do have a great relationship. We're still working together in many capacities, and Tanner's one of the best A&R guys I know for his age. He's really, really great. It's because I'm so focused on a certain trance sound or a certain want in trance as I am with certain other genres of dance, such as house or progressive house. Those are my true loves, and I really know what they are and what I'm listening to. So when somebody says, "Oh, the EDM tracks," I'm totally fucking clueless. I'm like, okay, so what exactly are you talking about? You'd have to play me an example, and I might go, "Oh yeah, I can see what you're saying," but I couldn't tell you. I couldn't actually. Not me anyway.
Well, I guess it again goes back to the subjectivity of music, but
Yeah.
it's just funny because it seems maybe it's just because of the internet age we're in and that everybody debates everything possible, but it's just interesting because there seems to be, maybe it's just because I'm ingrained in the trance scene, there just seems to be such a divide even within trance of the subgenres, let alone
Oh
trance
yeah.
versus other genres. And then it's, you know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
just kind of like, it gets kind of exhausting
Well,
sometimes because I'm like, I just
Well,
love
yeah,
beautiful
there's
music.
uplifting trance. Yeah, so there's uplifting trance and more traditional trance, and there's your trance 2.0 sound, and then there's your classic Armind Armada sound, which is now structured a different way than it was a year ago when we first were signed to Armada. There's all those things. I think you do need to pay careful attention to that if you want to be represented by a certain label, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that some of the greatest talent is bridging the gaps between creativeness and expectation. So like if Armind on Armada says, well, this is what we're pushing. This is the sound. This is kind of what is the Armind sound, or, what we think it's the Armind sound. We're going to produce a track that's more kind of geared down that way, because otherwise all we're doing is kind of producing ourselves off of the label. And I mean, that's smart business to some degree, but I think magic and beauty can still happen there. That's where the real talent is being able to do something amazing, really magic, but still fit formats.
Right. I guess also, I guess the issue is what I've seen, and maybe it's just because I'm too close to it at sometimes. I just need to like just listen to the music, but there's always just like comparisons among the genres and among the labels to an extent that there's just such rabid following of certain labels. And I'll be honest, I've been one of them in the past, but recently I'm like, what is the point of following just one label when there's so much good music out there?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think there's a sense of belonging. I think it's a psychological thing, in all honesty. I think when you belong to a group or a smaller group or more of a focus group of a sector of a trend or a sound, that there's a sense that you have family, or there's a sense that there's a more sense of belonging. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That kind of makes up the culture, right? That's kind of like the backbone of the culture we're talking about. But
Well,
as a producer, sorry, go ahead.
well, my sub question on that is, I agree, but then what I'm getting at is the negative. Well, I guess you could say it's negativity, but it's the people are so focused on their label or their subgenre that they like belittle
Yeah,
other
I
people
just
that.
don't care. I just don't care about that, though. That's the thing. I mean, I've been in the music business too long to care about people like that or things like that. I really don't care. I mean, I've got this great career of instrumental music, knowing that the greatest road to success is creative freedom. And I'm not going to say anything on the phone here that's going to shoot my toe off with regards to the culture of the dance music industry. But I can tell you that if a brilliant dance producer came out there and did something so incredibly amazing and unique that didn't fit the format, he wouldn't have a home. He would be all by himself out there without representation. Now, if you got the right representation, and he was on one of those labels that had these followings, and all these people are having these inner squabbles about what they think is right or wrong, or the purists think this is better or that is better. I mean, I think it's all just kind of based around, it's ridiculous. I think it goes back to your point. I mean, it's about the music. Music must always come first. If you're brave enough to stand in front of the line and do something incredibly unique, and a big label takes a chance on that sound, you've won. You've won big time. And who cares what people think? I mean, really, honestly, who cares what people think?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It's just interesting because like it gets exhausting sometimes when it's like you see. It's great that people are meeting people and enjoying the
Are
culture
these
of dance music,
producers
and
or are these fans?
it's kind of a mixture
Are
of
these
both.
musicians? Yeah, see, to me, it sounds more like a fan thing than it does really a producer musician thing, because, there's certain things you just don't apply yourself to as a professional musician. And one of the biggest comments I always hear from the pseudo professional is, oh, you sold out. As soon as somebody says that to me, is they're not a pro, because they're talking out their ass. The bottom line is what does selling out mean? What, that I'm successful, or I developed a sound that was different from the one you love, or I am no longer in your underground crew, or I don't belong to your underground peeps that are all shit talking about the other underground peeps. It's all stupid stuff. So at the end of the day, I personally think that what you're referring to is a group of fans potentially that are purists on their own sound, their own feelings of a certain culture, of a certain dance feeling, that is unto themselves, and they're just purists in that regard. I mean, but I can't pay attention to that stuff. It serves me zero purpose.
And it makes sense because at the end of the day, what does it matter? But all right,
No,
so
it matters. It matters nothing.
right. So we've almost gone the whole time without even talking about your new music. So
Oh my God,
um,
that.
yeah. So I did listen to what you sent me, and I'm excited. But I've also listened to all of your other tracks as Limelight. But to kind of
Cool.
speaking of that, talk about the name Limelight because that's is that an
Yeah.
alias or is that just what you release trance music under?
So yeah, what Limelight was Tanner and I when we first started, but Tanner since has gone solo. He's basically pursuing a solo production career as well as an A&R career. Limelight is now my moniker for doing upbeat, basically trance, four on the floor, probably 132 to 138 kind of stuff. Stuff that I cannot do I don't want to do in my original name, Nicholas Gunn. So, but the interesting thing about the cross pollination of these two brands is when you take kind of like what's happening in the trance scene today, we always have that breakdown, that beautiful space in the breakdown. That's kind of a part of where my Nicholas Gunn music is. It's that ambient texture. It's always been there in my original work. So to cross pollinate these two brands makes a lot of sense. So basically my Nicholas Gunn works are purely ambient, downbeat, chill, and the Limelight stuff is traditional trance. Not traditional in the sense of tempo or sound, but meaning more upbeat, four on the floor kind of stuff.
Right, and you've mentioned, well, I know, but to kind of go over for maybe listeners that aren't really listening, is you've released on Armada, and your tracks are played by Armin on A State of Trance all the time.
Yeah, we've been very fortunate. Yeah, we've gotten tons of play there. It's been great.
So is that to kind of is that the label that you've just found yourself releasing with, or because I've
No,
noticed there is a lot of people release on multiple different labels, so I was just curious if it's just kind of
yeah,
what's
no. So we have a deal that basically stops us from shopping elsewhere before Armada. What's called reject a track, and we talk openly about these kinds of deals because that's just the way it works. I mean, so when you do what's called an option deal with Armada and you're not exclusive, it means that everything that you produce in the studio, you run by them first. If they want it, they take it. If they don't, then they pass on it. Then maybe you shop it to somebody else that's more appropriate for. And in the case of Limelight, Amsterdam Trance and Rosnitzer Music has also been another great partner for Limelight. And Roz has just been wonderful. And there's been 2 tracks from Limelight on Amsterdam Trance. So that's another partner we've been working with. I've been working with, excuse me. I keep saying we because Tanner and I were together for a year, and it's only been 6 months since we've not been Limelight together. So I should say I nowadays.
okay. I love Rasmussen and I love Amsterdam Dance, and
Yeah,
I guess people don't talk about them as much as other labels, but I
yeah,
want to put it out there to anybody that will listen to this podcast that go check them out, and specifically Limelight, because you will
yeah,
love it. But anyway, so I know sometimes you can't really go into detail about upcoming releases, but
yeah.
before we wrap up, what do you have coming down, and what should people be looking forward to for
Sure.
2019?
Oh my gosh, I got so much stuff. So I've got a full Nicholas Gunn album, which is 10 tracks of ambient music, which is just probably the best work I've ever done. I'm so incredibly proud of this record. It came from a very deep, meaningful place for me, and a lot of hurt, a lot of anguish, a lot of, I don't know, just pure emotion put into this record, and it really came out great. So that's coming out underneath my own label that I have with Sony, The Orchard. And it's called Blue Dot Studios. And I don't really want label representation anywhere for my Nicholas Gunn works. I don't need it. I don't want it. I have great relationships at the satellite radio stations and in press and whatever I've been fortunate that I can just keep putting stuff out, So the relationship there is my own. But on that record, I did a relationship with Raz to do 4 tracks from the album that are the vocal tracks, so 4 vocal tracks from the ambient album. We're remixing them for the trance market, and they're all tempo friendly. So basically, they were all composed tempo wise between 135 and 138 on the half beat. So we play tempo games. It's great. It seems like it's a downbeat track, but actually it works for a perfect remix as well. So that's happening. So we got this great partnership with Amsterdam Trance and R&M. So that's happening there. Then Limelight, there's 2 brand new tracks coming out in the new year that I can't talk a lot about except for one that I'm doing with Lex, Little Warrior. What an amazing vocalist. We got an amazing track with her. The other track I can't talk much about right now because it's still in development. And then there's also a killer remix from a massive name. So we're really excited about that.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, lots of stuff going on. It's going to be a busy year.
You touched on it, and because Tanner is going to be a guest on the podcast soon as well.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit. I know you don't really need to go into full detail, but other than, well, because you were alluding to the fact that you're used to saying we, but now it's I.
Yeah, I keep saying we. Every time I mention Limelight, it's just something I've done, I keep doing, yeah. But that's okay.
So just to be clear, there was nothing, I mean, obviously you guys still work together, so there's nothing, like, bad, because sometimes you hear, like, a duo or whatever break up, because we just had that whole Dash Berlin fiasco. So it's nothing like that, right?
Oh, no, I mean, look, it wasn't pleasant.
Okay.
If Tanner was here with me right now, we'd be like laughing our asses off because it was not pleasant. Here's the thing. So Tanner is an extremely ambitious young producer, and great A&R guy. When I first met Tanner, I was looking for a guy to start a trance act with that knew every ounce and angle of the genre, all the hot tracks, what was going on, and who was keeping up with it all. Tanner is like the epitome of that. I don't have enough hours in a day to even think about doing that, because I've got so much other stuff going on with my other side of my career. So you got to be smart. You got to delegate, right? You got to fill in the gaps. So Tanner and I had this wonderful partnership. Not only is he a great young producer, he's a great young A&R guy, but at the end of the day, we're both born to be solo artists. And we served a purpose together. In the first year, we produced some great tracks together under Limelight. But in the end, it was quite clear that we were both heading in more of a solo direction. And before the whole thing just got really, really nasty, and it did get difficult, it did get a little tricky, we decided to make a deal where I would take the Limelight brand. Obviously, Tanner would retain all of the rights to everything that he's done in Limelight in perpetuity moving forward. Nothing ever changes. And fortunately, we've had an opportunity now to come back together and kind of work with each other independently, filling in our weak spots. Like Limelight has a mix show every month. Tanner sources all the content, writes all the dialogue. I hop on the microphone. I finish the production in the studio, but we work together on the mix show. And that's what we were always the best at doing together. So we still have a great partnership that way, and it will continue that way.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah.
That's what I thought, but you never know.
Well, I think people out there, it was dodgy. It was dodgy for a bit. I tried not to say too much, and I didn't want to say too much because I love him. I love him like a brother. And it was a very difficult time for both of us. And you have to have a tremendous amount of patience and respect for the other person's situation, no matter what. Because what happens down the line is the only thing that reverberates and is left hanging there are the words. You just got to shut up, and you just got to put your nose down, and you just got to do the right thing always. And at the end of the day, we worked it out, and it was a beautiful thing.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Well, I'm looking forward to everything this year. Obviously,
Thank you.
I mean, I'm a fan, but I'm just one
Thanks.
person over here. Um,
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, Limelight's just getting started. I mean, it's only Limelight has been releasing tracks for just a little over a year. So hopefully, in 2019, it's going to ramp it up even more. So excited about that.
Great. So before I let you go, is there anything you would like to plug that you haven't plugged? Like your social media or website?
Oh, sure. Well, no, people can follow us. See, I'm always saying us and we. I gotta remember. So Limelight, just me. You can go to Limelight Official on Facebook. It's Limelight Official on Twitter. Excuse me. No, it's Limelight OFFCL on Twitter, and it's Limelight Official on Instagram. Now, mind you, there's no I in light, so it's LIMELGHT. And
that could be tricky.
Got it. Yeah, I know. Well, we didn't want to compete with all the other Limelight stuff out there, so drop the I. So at the time when Tanner and I were together, we made that decision. It was actually really good because it's always good. We were talking about search engine optimization earlier and about being smart on the internet, and it really worked in our favor at the time. So, but and then also just really want to plug the new ambient record, Riding the Thermals, Nicholas Gunn, coming out on January 25th, and you can follow me on Nicholas Gunn Official, and that's the same everywhere on all social media.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down and chatting. We've been talking for over an hour, but
wow,
I appreciate it.
That's great.
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
Thanks for having me, Brooke. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Well, have a great night, and till we speak again.
Yes, until we speak again. Thanks, Brooke. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Bye-bye.
All right.